My boss slid a termination letter across the table after I'd spent 10 years building their empire. They thought they were cutting costs, but they were actually cutting the brake lines. I didn't get mad. I just walked out and waited for the crash. This is where the real game begins, and trust me, you won't want to miss the fallout. Make sure you're subscribed to see how this unfolds and let us know in the comments, have you ever had to train your own replacement? The folder hit the mahogany table with a sound that was softer than a whisper, but to me, it felt like a gunshot. It was navy blue, pristine, and thick enough to hold the wreckage of my entire career. "We've decided to move in a different direction, Elias," Britt said. She didn't blink, she didn't stumble. She slid the folder toward me with the casual indifference of a waiter delivering a lunch menu. Effective immediately. I sat there, the hum of the air conditioning suddenly sounding like a jet engine in my ears. I looked at Howell. He was the man I had reported to for 7 years, the man whose chaotic mistakes I had quietly fixed late on Friday nights so he wouldn't look incompetent to the board. Howell was currently finding the acoustic tiles on the ceiling fascinating. His thumb was twisting his wedding ring round and round, a nervous tick I knew well. He wouldn't look at me. He couldn't. "My team has reviewed the efficiency metrics from the transition period," Britt continued, her voice devoid of any human warmth. It was a recitation, a script she had probably practiced in the mirror. "The 6 analysts you've spent the last quarter training are now operating at 87% efficiency. That exceeds our redundancy threshold. There is simply no longer a business case for your role." I blinked, the exhaustion behind my eyes pulsing like a bruise. For 3 months, I had been pulling 16-hour shifts. I was running on caffeine and loyalty, training a pack of fresh graduates who barely knew how to open a spreadsheet, all while managing my own full caseload. I had essentially cloned myself 6 times over because they asked me to. "They don't know the architecture yet," I said. My voice sounded strange, hollow, distant. "They can run the reports, Britt, but they don't understand the data structure. We are only halfway through the knowledge transfer." "That is an opinion," she cut in, tapping the folder with a manicured nail. "The data says otherwise. Your severance package is outlined here. 2 months of pay, standard release." That was when I felt the air pressure in the room shift. I turned my head slightly and saw him, a security guard standing just inside the conference room door. He was bald, arms crossed over a chest that strained his uniform, staring at a spot on the wall. He didn't have a laptop. He wasn't here for a meeting. My jaw locked so hard my teeth ached. "Seriously," I looked back at Howell, "you brought security." Howell finally glanced at me for a fraction of a second, his face pale and sweaty. He swallowed hard but said nothing. The betrayal was absolute. It wasn't just that they were firing me, it was that they were erasing me, and they expected me to say thank you for the privilege. I didn't open the blue folder, I didn't even touch it. I stood up, the motion slow and deliberate. I picked up my black notebook, the leather-bound one that had been with me through every crisis, every launch, and every disaster this company had survived for the last decade, and I walked toward the door. "Elias," Britt called out, her tone sharpening, "we need your badge." I didn't stop. I walked past the security guard, who tensed up as if he expected me to throw a punch. I didn't have the energy for violence. I stepped out into the hallway, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. People were walking past, clutching coffees, laughing about their weekends, completely unaware that the architect of their entire operational workflow had just been executed in conference room B. I pressed the elevator button. My heart was thudding against my ribs, a heavy, erratic rhythm, but my hands were steady. I checked my phone. My badge still worked on the turnstile. My name was likely still on the digital directory, but the clock was ticking. In an hour, maybe 2, the Slack channels would start buzzing with rumors. The questions would start. I stepped into the elevator and watched the doors close, sealing off the life I had known for 10 years. Outside, the city was gray and indifferent. I summoned a rideshare and stood on the curb, watching the traffic bleed together. My phone vibrated in my pocket, once, twice. Then a rapid-fire succession of buzzes. It was the team leads. They were asking about the client data merge scheduled for noon. Another message flagged a critical dashboard error. I looked at the screen, seeing the frantic text from a junior analyst. "Elias, the pivot table is breaking when we import the West Tech file." Wah. "Tell you's the fix." I let the screen go dark. I slid the phone back into my pocket. The car arrived, and the driver didn't ask why a man in a suit was going home at 10:00 a.m. He just drove. I stared out the window, watching the skyline retreat. Britt and Howell thought they had extracted all the value they needed. They thought the systems I built were static machines, engines that would run forever once turned on. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. They assumed the efficiency metrics measured understanding. They didn't know that the entire infrastructure was held together not by code, but by the daily, invisible adjustments I made, adjustments that were stored nowhere but in my own head. The first 48 hours were a blur of silence and phantom vibrations. I woke up the next morning at 4:30 a.m. out of pure habit. My body was ready to fight fires that no longer existed. My heart raced with the adrenaline of a deadline I didn't have. I reached for my phone, my thumb hovering over the work email app before I remembered it was gone, deleted, access revoked. My personal phone, however, was a graveyard of missed attempts. 17 missed calls, 3 voicemails, all from Howell. I didn't listen to a single one. By the third day, the silence in my house shifted. It stopped feeling like a void and started feeling like sanctuary. I was sitting in my kitchen, actually tasting my coffee for the first time in years, when a heavy knock rattled my front door. I checked the peephole. It was Zach, one of the few junior analysts who actually had potential. He looked like he had been dragged through a hedge backward. I opened the doors. Jesus Elias, Zach breathed out, stepping inside as if he were escaping a war zone. You are impossible to find. We've been calling you nonstop. I know, I said calmly. He dropped his backpack on my kitchen floor with a heavy thud and ran a hand through his messy hair. They split the team up, reassigned everybody this morning. Nobody knows what's going on. It's a complete mess. The whole platform is coming apart at the seams. I poured him a mug of black coffee, no sugar, just the way I had taught him to drink it during those late nights before launch. They said we'd have access to all your files, Zach said, his voice rising in panic. Britt told us everything was documented in the shared drive, but the roadmaps aren't there. The contingency systems, gone. We can't even figure out who is supposed to lead the West Tech account. Britt said the efficiency was at 87%, I said, leaning against the counter. Britt doesn't know what a SQL query is, Zach snapped. One of the new guys she hired, he quit this morning, just walked out, left his badge on the desk and pieced out. He said he wasn't paid enough to be screamed at by clients. I nodded. It wasn't surprise I felt, it was validation. You're not going to say anything, Zach asked, staring at me. I don't work there anymore, Zach. You should see Howell, he continued, shaking his head. He looks like he hasn't slept in a week. He keeps staring at your empty office like you're going to magically materialize and fix the dashboard. But here's the thing, Elias, Britt is spinning it. She's telling the execs that you left a mess. She's blaming the crashes on legacy data issues caused by your mismanagement. My eyes narrowed. It was the classic move of a corporate climber: burn the bridge, then blame the engineer for the fire. Britt wasn't just satisfied with firing me, she was going to use my name as a shield for her own incompetence. She was polished, she was ruthless, and she had the ear of the board. But she was fighting a war she didn't understand, against an enemy she had foolishly underestimated. The silence I used to resent had transformed into a weapon. While Crawford Analytics was burning, I was sitting on my porch, watching the sunlight stretch across my neighbor's lawn. It was the first time in 10 years I wasn't viewing the world through double-paned office glass or calculating the ROI of my own free time. But I wasn't just resting, I was gathering intelligence. By week 3, the headhunters were circling like sharks sensing blood in the water. My phone didn't stop ringing, but the tone of the conversations had changed. These weren't standard introductory calls. One recruiter from a major competitor told me their VP had flagged my name the second it hit the market. They knew. So what exactly did you do at Crawford? One interviewer, a sharp woman from Chicago, asked me. The job title says strategist, but the rumors say you were the only thing keeping the lights on. I took a sip of water, looking her in the eye. I was the firewall, I said calmly. I kept the bad decisions from burning the house down. She laughed, but she offered me a contract on the spot. I turned it down. I turned them all down. I wasn't ready to jump back into the machine, not until I saw how the rash at Crawford played out. I had a specific leverage point, a trap I had inadvertently set simply by doing my job too well. That leverage arrived on a Tuesday evening in the form of a delivery van. The driver handed me a gift basket the size of a small engine block, wrapped in cellophane and packed with premium scotch and coffee. Taped to the front was a white envelope. I didn't need to ask who it was from. The note inside was brief. Whatever they were paying you, I'll double it. Call me Tyson. Tyson was the CEO of West Tech, Crawford's largest client. He accounted for 30% of their revenue. He had never liked Howell and he tolerated Britt, but he trusted me. I picked up the phone and dialed him immediately. Did they come crawling back yet? Tyson asked, picking up on the first ring. Not yet, I said, pouring a glass of the scotch he'd sent. But the silence is getting loud. They missed the shipping deadline on the Alpha merge, Tyson said, his voice dropping to a growl. Britt tried to tell me it was a software glitch. I told her I know the software because you explained it to me. I gave them a formal warning, Elias, 7 figures hanging by a thread. If you don't go back, I walk. There it was. The clever trap wasn't a password I had hidden or a file I had deleted. It was the relationships I had built. Britt had fired the only person the clients actually trusted. The crash happened faster than even I expected. On day 29, a trade journal ran the headline, Crawford Analytics halts production amidst quality control crisis. That was corporate speak for absolute failure. That night at 11:07 p.m., my intercom buzzed. I was half asleep on the couch, the blue light of the TV flickering in the dark living room. I walked to the wall unit and pressed the button. Oh yeah, it's Arthur Crawford, a voice crackled through the speaker. I need to speak with you. I stared at the plastic speaker grill. Arthur Crawford, the name on the building. The man who sat in the corner office on the top floor, insulated by layers of middle management. In 10 years, he had never spoken to me directly. Now he was standing on my front porch in the middle of the night. I buzzed him in. When I opened the door, he looked nothing like the titan of industry I saw at town hall meetings. His tie was loose, his shirt wrinkled, and his eyes were sunken, rimmed with the red exhaustion of a man watching his legacy evaporate. He stepped into my hallway without a word, the air of authority completely stripped away. We sat at my kitchen table. He didn't ask for water. He just placed his hands flat on the wood surface as if trying to steady himself. Tyson is pulling the contract, Arthur said quietly. Production is down 40%. Support is bleeding out. I don't know what Howell was doing, but he let it all fall apart. Howell didn't do anything, I said, my voice cold. That was the problem, and Britt, she thought efficiency meant cutting the people who knew how to fix the machines. Arthur looked up, meeting my eyes for the first time. I'm asking you to come back, Elias. I stood up, the anger I thought I had buried flaring up. Let me tell you what you threw away, Arthur. I missed my sister's wedding for a server migration. I missed my uncle's funeral because Howell panicked over a Q3 report. I gave you a decade of my life and you let Britt walk me out like I was stealing office supplies. Arthur flinched. The reality of the betrayal, the human cost of his business decision, was finally hitting him. He realized then that Britt had sold him a lie. She had promised him savings, but she had delivered ruin. I know, Arthur whispered. It shouldn't have happened. I was misled about the redundancy. You weren't misled, you just didn't look, I countered. I need a plan, Elias, not an apology, a plans. I looked at him, this powerful man reduced to begging in my kitchen. You'll hear from me tomorrow, I said. Now get out. The next morning, I didn't put on a suit. I put on a black blazer and a t-shirt. I wasn't dressing for a job interview, I was dressing for a hostile takeover. I spent the morning compiling a dossier. I printed out the text messages from my former team, the panic-ridden emails from Tyson, and the public stock reports showing Crawford's freefall. I organized it all into a crisp black binder. I drove to the office. The security guard at the front desk, the same one who had watched me leave, looked confused but didn't stop me. My badge still worked. I walked straight to the executive floor. The panic was palpable. People were running between cubicles with stacks of paper. I saw Howell in his office, head in his hands, looking like a ghost, but I wasn't there for him. I walked into the boardroom. The board of directors was already in an emergency session. Arthur was at the head of the table. Britt was standing by the whiteboard, pointing at a graph with a laser pointer, her voice shrill as she tried to explain why the numbers were lying. The system architecture is sound, she was saying, desperate to maintain the illusion. It's the legacy staff. They aren't adapting to the new protocols. We just need to purge the resistant elements and... The only resistant element in this room is the one holding the laser pointer, I said loud enough to cut through the room. Britt spun around, her eyes going wide. You can't be in here, security. Sit down, Britt, Arthur said. His voice was low, dangerous. I walked to the table and threw the black binder down. It landed with a heavy thud, far louder than the blue folder Britt had slid to me weeks ago. That binder contains the resignation letters of your 3 best analysts, I said, addressing the board, ignoring Britt entirely. It contains a formal intent to sue from West Tech for breach of contract, and it contains a log of every single system failure that has occurred since I walked out of this building. I opened the binder to the first page, a graph I had built myself. Britt told you I was redundant because my team was 87% efficient, I said, pointing at the data. What she didn't tell you is that I was the one manually correcting the other 13% of the code every single night. You fired the mechanic and kept the car, and now you're surprised the engine seized. Britt tried to speak. This is unauthorized data access. He's stealing company property. He's saving the company property, Arthur snapped, slamming his hand on the table. The silence that followed was absolute. I leaned forward, placing both hands on the polished wood. I'm not here to ask for my job back. That job doesn't exist anymore. I'm here to offer you a way out. But it's going to cost you a lot more than a severance package. The stakes had never been higher. The company was hours away from insolvency, Tyson was on the verge of walking, and the board was looking at me not as an ex-employee, but as the only lifeboat on a sinking ship. The silence in the boardroom was heavy enough to crush a man, but I felt lighter than I had in years. I didn't sit down. I stayed standing at the head of the table, looking down at the 12 most powerful people in the company. This is the situation, I said, my voice steady. Tyson L. from West Tech is ready to sign a 5-year exclusive renewal, but there is a condition attached to the contract. I slid a single sheet of paper from the back of the binder and placed it in front of Arthur. Arthur picked it up, his eyes scanning the text. He let out a breath that sounded like a laugh of disbelief. He wants you. He wants assurance, I corrected. He wants to know that the person managing his data understands the architecture. He wants me installed as the Chief Operations Officer, with a permanent seat on this board and full veto power over all personnel decisions in the technical department. Britt made a sound like a strangled cat. Chief Operations Officer, you were a strategist. You can't just walk in here and demand a C-suite title and a board seat because you have a friend at a client firm. It's not a demand, Britt, I said, turning to her. It's a purchase price. You sold my competence to save a few dollars on the quarterly budget. Now I'm buying it back at market value, and the market just went up. One of the older board members, a woman named Alina who rarely spoke, leaned forward. And if we refuse? Then I walk out that door, I said. I call Tyson and tell him you declined. He pulls the contract by close of business today. Crawford's stock drops another 20% by Friday, and I go work for your biggest competitor on Monday. Arthur looked at Britt, then back at the paper. The realization washed over him completely. He saw the manipulative web she had spun, hiding the failures, blaming the legacy staff, driving the company toward a cliff just to boost her own metrics. Britt, Arthur said, his voice quiet but echoing in the room. Arthur, you can't be serious, she stammered, her polished veneer cracking. He's blackmailing us. He's saving us, Arthur said. He looked at the security guard standing by the door, the same guard Britt had used to intimidate me weeks ago. Escort Britt to her office to collect her personal effects. Her access is revoked immediately. Britt stood up, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. She looked around the table for support, but every face was turned away. The spell was broken. She had been exposed not just as incompetent, but as a liability. As the guard led her out, I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just took the empty seat at the right hand of the CEO. Now, I said, opening my notebook, let's talk about how we're going to fix this mess. The next morning, I walked through the glass doors of Crawford Analytics. I wasn't wearing a visitor badge. Clipped to my lapel was a new ID. Card black background, gold lettering with COO printed beneath my name. The atmosphere on the floor changed the moment I stepped off the elevator. It wasn't fear, it was relief. The chaotic energy, the frantic running around, the sense of impending doom, it all evaporated. I went straight to the war room, the cramped pod where my old team had been drowning for a month. Zach was slumped at his desk, staring at a wall of red error messages. When he saw me, he literally dropped his coffee cup. Fortunately, it was empty. Elias, he whispered as if he were seeing a ghost. Get everyone in the conference room, I said. We have work to do. You're back, he asked, a grin spreading across his face. I'm back, I said, and nobody is getting fired today. In fact, you're all getting raises. But first, we fix the architecture. The next 6 months were the hardest of my life, but they were also the best. We didn't just patch the holes, we rebuilt the ship. With Britt gone and Howell quietly retired to a consultancy role that meant he stayed home, I had the freedom to run the department the way it was meant to be run. I brought back the analysts who had quit. I reorganized the workflow. I set up the contingency systems that Britt had deleted. 3 months later, West Tech signed the renewal. Crawford's stock didn't just recover, it hit an all-time high. Arthur kept his word. I had my equity, my board seat, and total autonomy. We met for coffee once a week, not as boss and employee, but as partners. He never apologized explicitly for firing me, but he didn't have to. Every time he signed off on one of my proposals without reading it, that was the apology. One evening, I stayed late. The office was quiet, just the hum of the servers and the soft glow of monitors. I walked past Britt's old office, now Zach's office, as I had promoted him to Director of Integration. I stood by the window looking out at the city lights. I remembered the feeling of that blue folder sliding across the table, the feeling of being discarded, of being told I was redundant. I checked my phone. I had a notification from LinkedIn. Britt had viewed my profile, her headline now read "Open to Opportunities." I swiped the notification away and turned back to the room. I wasn't the invisible mechanic anymore. I was the architect. And for the first time in 10 years, I wasn't just keeping the lights on, I was owning the building. I picked up my bag, turned off the lights in my office, and walked out. The silence wasn't heavy anymore, it was peaceful.